Hello everyone, and welcome to the Houdini Technical Director Series, Volume 2, with your lead instructor, Mr. Steve Twist.
Hey.
Hey, how's it going, Steve?
It's pretty good, thank you. How are you?
Not bad. Are you excited about Volume 2?
Yeah, I'm super excited.
Fantastic. This should be one very interesting journey, and finally, we can wrap up the Talented Ball project. Myself, Jason Busby, will be playing the role of both secondary instructor and student. So what does secondary instructor mean? Well, simple. It's kind of like an instructor that sits in the back of a classroom and listens to the lead instructor, and if from time to time he sees where a secondary perspective on a particular lecture might be useful, he'll jump in and give it. So I will offer that as well as we work our way through this volume. Now, what does the role of student consist of? That just means I need to listen carefully to what Steve is saying, so that if anything is being presented that in my mind could be looked at as something a bit fuzzy by a newcomer to the world of Houdini, then I will hit Steve with some questions as if I was that student. And hopefully those of you that are watching the video, if you find ourselves in a situation like that, hopefully I will ask the right questions. And then, of course, Steve can act as if he is in a classroom and answer the questions and make everything black and white. So, with that, I'd like to give a quick note about Volume 2. And that is, Volume 2 is a continuation of the Houdini Technical Director Series Volume 1 DVD. In DVD 1, we basically set out on a mission to complete an entire project in Houdini from start to finish. So we started out with storyboards, and in Volume 1 was focused on the construction of all of the digital assets that were going to be required for bringing the storyboards to life and of course, into our final rendered state. So let's go ahead and jump over, Steve, to our storyboards and take a quick look at them. So a quick recap, we begin with a camera doing a pan around a stadium that is crammed full of a very excited audience. This audience is made up of, a bunch of spheres. They're all bouncing around and happy. The camera's panning all the way to the end. And as the camera approaches the end, they all start to settle down because it is time for our talented ball. So spotlights kick on. When the spotlights kick on, we see a talented ball. He takes a very deep breath and then begins bouncing. Our spotlights are going to track our character as he bounces forward, and then off to the left side of our camera, where we then pick up the next shot, him approaching a ladder. So we can also see a pool, so at this point everybody should have an idea as to where this is going. Our character will not only approach the ladder, but he will begin climbing the ladder. The camera will follow him all the way to the top, where he will then climb out onto, or bounce out, not climb out, but bounce out onto a diving board, where he will do several jumps, and then finally these jumps will lead into his final huge backflip, where he will fall all the way down to the pool at the bottom. Now, of course, as he's going down, we'll flip over to another camera. This other camera will show him flying by with such great velocity, where then we can switch back and see that things just did not end well for him, because there was no liquid in the pool, no liquid of any kind. So he's kind of flattened out. But hey, the good thing is our crowd will be very excited.
Disturbingly excited.
Disturbingly excited, that's right. So these were the storyboards presented to us at the very beginning of Volume 1. And then at that point, Steve put on his technical director's hat. He took a look at the storyboards, stepped back and said, all right, what can I do that would make this project go faster for an artist? He divided everything up into digital assets. So we had the construction of our audience and our stadium, our floor, our stage, our ladder, our pool, and our character as well. And with all of these assets created in this volume, we'll be able to put all of the assets to good use. Now, Volume 1 ended with all of our assets being properly placed. So let's go ahead and jump over to Houdini. And Steve, take just a minute and talk about the different assets that we have.
Sure, so we started out with a very basic asset with our floor, which had a simple size control and some control over our shaders. From there we moved on to the stage, which had a little bit more control. We had our platform size in all 3 dimensions, and we had control over the support radius. And you'll notice that everything will conform to that support radius. So let's set that back to 2.5. Along with the support radius, we could specify an object we wanted our stage to sit on, and set up some basic parameters for our stage shaders. From there we moved on to set up our character, complete with, let's grab the tool, there we go, our custom HUD for the character with sliders allowing us to easily animate this guy. From our character we moved on to set up the pool. And the pool had some nice controls over the height, over the inner depth, over our outer radius, our inner radius, our bevel height, and the bevel width, along with a floor object just like our stage, and some shader parameters as well. So let's just undo to set our pool back down. From our pool we moved on to the ladder, adding yet more controls. So we have height, we have the number of rungs that we want on our ladder, things like the ladder width and the radius of the poles for the ladder. We also had things like our board length and our board width for controlling the diving board. On the shaders tab we have yet more parameters dealing with shaders. From the ladder we moved on to the piece de resistance of the first TD volume, and that was our bleachers and audience asset. The bleachers and audience asset had a huge range of parameters, things like the number of rows going back on each of our columns, the number of columns going around our stadium, the inner radius of our stadium, the height and depth of our stadium, the bench width and bench depth for each of our benches, and the support pole radius for all of the poles supporting the stadium. We also had control over the shaders for the stadium. We also had a huge amount of control for the audience that were randomly generated. It's a randomly generated crowd that is sitting on our stadium. Things like the maximum number of audience members allowed on any one bench. Do we want empty seats or don't we want empty seats? Control over both the numbers of audience members on each bench in terms of random seed and their placement on the benches in terms of an offset seed. We also have a bias from back to front as to how much of the audience do we want to fall off to basically diminish in numbers as we come to the front of the stadium. We have control over the size of the audience members and a seed to randomize that. We can also tell the audience to look at a specific object in our scene and to always follow that no matter where the object goes by using our audience lookout. We have some animation parameters for our audience, things like the speed and the minimum and maximum amplitude for their squash and stretch. And we have complete control over a very nice shader where we basically randomly assign skin color and shirt texture, hair color and hair texture, eye textures, mouth textures, and nose textures, all to our audience, all randomly assigned, and we have complete control over the assignment of each of these components by changing the local seed for each of these components. And with that, we wrapped up TD Volume 1.
Well, we then placed everything. And then
Yes,
we wrapped
did.
it. So everything is exactly where it needs to be for the start of Volume 2. So in this volume, Steve's going to be taking that technical director's hat and pulling it off and putting it back on over and over again as he jumps back and forth between the role of technical director and artist. So things are going to kick off real quick with some animation, as we will be bringing our crowd to life and making sure that they are animated accordingly. We'll also animate the talented ball performing the way he needs to perform. We'll then move into camera placement and camera animation. From there, we'll move into lighting, and we're going to spend a bit of time with lighting. Instead of just throwing in a couple spotlights and calling it like a lot of introductory videos and books like to do, we're going to take some time, talk a little bit about post-production, and then we're going to set up a character light rig and a bunch of lights for handling the stadium in special ways like rim lighting, etc., that we can then use later on in post-production for complete control over every single object with all of our lights, and that's going to be very amazing. From lighting, we're then going to move into the world of render passes. So the primary goal of this entire DVD is to make sure that everybody has a clear-cut understanding how to do professional level rendering. Because the animation stuff that Steve's going to show you, you guys are going to pick that up in just a matter of minutes, and then it really comes down to months and months of practice with animation to get really good at finessing animation curves. Lighting, once again, it's going to take practice, but once Steve gets in there and demonstrates how to set up the lights, you guys are going to have a good idea. But when we get into rendering, that's where things are really going to take a very special turn, because we're going to set things up in such a way that we're going to have somewhere around 80 or 81 render passes for this project that will then be composited all back together in Houdini's Compositor in such a way that the artist, in this case Steve, will have complete control over pretty much everything in the scene without having to re-render a single shot. And that is a lot of power. Now, to pull this off and to deal with so many different render passes, we're going to, once again, take off the artist hat and put on the technical director's hat and look at it as a problem and think of it through the eyes of efficiency. How would we go about making this a very easy thing to approach as an artist? So to do this, we're going to find a way to describe all of our render passes in as close to English as we can. And this will basically comprise a new render description format that we're going to put together. So with this new render description format that will describe the 80 some odd passes, then we're going to write a Python script. It'll be a render script that will read this human-like description and automatically generate all of the render passes for our talented ball. From there, we're going to move into the world of compositing. That is, of course, after we fire off all of those renders, which really is just firing off our script. Once all of the renders are complete, move into the world of compositing. Steve will give a very quick introduction to the concept of compositing and layering layers together. From there, we have 80 some odd passes to deal with. So once again, we need to approach this from a technical point of view instead of an artist point of view, because from an artist point of view, this could be very daunting. So as a technical director, Steve is going to create some compositing assets to make life easier for the artist. Then the artist can turn around and use these assets to quickly assemble the 80 some odd different render passes into a final composite. And we'll set it up so that these assets also come with their own quick controls as well for adjusting things like intensities, etc. From there, we're going to wrap everything up with a quick look at a video editing trick that we can do inside of Houdini. Since we don't want to take anything outside of Houdini and we have these different shots that are all rendered off, we're going to show you how we can use a file cop to mimic a very simple video editor so that we can assemble all of our frames together and have one final rendered out movie. So that is our goal for Volume 2. Anything you'd like to add?
Oh, I'd really like to show our final edit as we're talking about.
That's a good idea.
Edit. Cool. So here we have the final edit from this volume of the TD series. So let's watch it back. Now it is going to be a little choppy because bearing in mind we are recording on this machine which is using some of our processing power.
So they all settled down, light kicks on, boing, 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 boing. Sound effects, you know. We just need sound effects in this.
Sound effects and music.
Boing, boing, and what? Amazing backflip all the way down. Crowd's excited, and splat. All right, that's pretty much it. So is there anything else, Steve, that you would like to add before we kick off Volume 2?
No, I think that pretty much covers it.
Fantastic. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoy what is about to come your way. I hope you find it very educational. So with that, let's go ahead and bring this introduction to a close and get started with Volume 2.